we're really being outrun. If you look at the maths of Australia's situation in particular, zero productivity growth and actually the worst disposable income growth performance in the OECD, the narrative actually is status and potentially even decline. So if you think that growth is good, then you are pro-entrepreneurship because the entrepreneur is the hero of the story, not the villain.
But what might a country like Australia look like 100 years from now?
We need to earn optimism because the nation wasn't built by pessimists.
Last week, I interviewed Chris Bradley, a director of the McKinsey Global Institute and one of the authors of A Century of Plenty, a book about what he calls the machine of progress. Workers, skills, investment, invention, energy, cities, trade and markets, and how they compounded into the most prosperous century in human history. He's one of the sharpest thinkers I've had in front of me. Here's the conversation. Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for joining me today. You've got your book out, A Century of Plenty, A Story of Progress for Generations to Come. You've got a number of co-authors. I wanted to ask, what made you guys write this book now? Why now?
Well, the extrinsic motivation was the firm McKinsey turned 100 this year.
Oh, right.
And so we thought, well, you know, it's interesting because James McKinsey, sitting in Chicago somewhere in 1926, the profession of consulting didn't exist, but skyscrapers were going up everywhere. And I think it was about, well, there's this scientific method. What would it look like to apply that to companies? So the 100-year anniversary prompted us to think, as the McKinsey Global Institute, which is the economics think tank of McKinsey, we got challenged, well, if anyone is in a position to maybe step back and say, what did the world of business learn in the last 100 years, isn't it you? And that sowed the germs of the project. And then we thought, oh, well, if you think about the last 100 years, like think about the lives of our grandparents and what they were like. But it really got us thinking, like, I don't have any grandkids yet, but if I did have one in 2100, what would if he or she did the same thought experiment, would they see what we see?
Yeah.
And that's what led to this idea of, well, let's look back 100 years, but let's dream about, could we pull off another century of progress like that again?
Yeah, I thought the technique of introducing yourselves and then introducing your grandparents was a really effective one. And it made me think of my own family. So all four of my grandparents grew up in rural Queensland in the sugarcane farming industry. And so my great-grandparents ran farms. They all worked in agriculture, like all of them. And then my parents went to university and got into services jobs like teaching and speech pathology. And now here I am working in a even less vital area of media. But you can see the progression, you know, agriculture, services, and then something a little bit more creative. And that is a story that is repeated in almost every family.
Well, all of our grandparents' stories are kind of like a reflection of what was happening in the world. So, for example, agriculture, in 1925, 2/3 of humans lived in farms or worked on farms. Now it's like 25%, but in countries like ours, like 2%.
Right.
And in the same way, I mean, my grandfather started life in Dundee, Scotland, a really industrial town, but his life was also the story of like almost global geopolitics, World War II in North Africa, then had a job in Suez. He ran a school, but then, of course, the Suez crisis happened and had to flee, and kind of with a young family, my mum was 9, turned up in Australia starting from scratch in 1952. But even then, if you look at their Australian story, their first house, no indoor toilet, no car. So their whole life is just and you step back, and I have this conversation with lots of people. If you add up all those stories of the grandparents, that is the economic story of life, moving to the city, moving away from the farm, but also being buffeted and influenced by global events.
Yeah, so you guys identify the machine of progress. Can you tell me what the components are of this machine?
So let me simplify it because there's 8 components, but the real idea is, if you think it like a giant statue and it's firm and it stands on it stands on a plinth of trust. Like you've got to have trust, and then it's got 2 big legs. The first big leg is energy.
Yep.
So the world uses 10 times more energy than it did. Or if you think about it this way, like the average person on the planet uses 1.8 tons of crude equivalent per year. Whichever way you put it, that might be, if you tried to convert that into human work, that's about 45,000 hours of work. So like 20 years of work kind of being done for us now. So basically that's the new thing that happened, energy. And the second new thing that happened is capital. And capital per worker went up 9 times. And many people think, oh, that's a bit of a, what do you mean capital per worker? We literally just mean stuff, equipment, tools that you have to work with.
Yep.
And if you account for the fact that we actually have 9 times more workers than we did in 1925, that means we've got 81 times, like 9 times 9, 81 times more capital. And so the system of economics that produced this growth, that never happened before in human history, really is about how did we get a system that could amass that much capital, which is largely about cooperation and trust, and that much energy, which is about physics and engineering, kind of into one place. And then the other aspects of it are things, well, obviously need workers.
Yep.
So population, the world population went up 4 times.
Right.
But the number of workers actually went up 9 times, and that's partly farms.
Yep.
It's partly fertility. We had a favourable demographics, but also females. So doubling of female participation in the workforce.
Yep.
Cities played an absolutely enormous role. So going from about 1 in 5 people living in a city to now almost 60%.
Yeah.
One stat that I kind of still don't believe, but it's true, I've checked it, is that if you think about the number of people who live within 20 kilometres of the average human, it's actually up over 100 times.
So we're all living in denser environments.
Yeah, we've all moved, not only are there more people, but most importantly, we've all moved closer together. So just think how much more human interaction. So you need skills and education, technology and knowledge. But there's one final ingredient in our book that we talk quite a lot about, is kind of the unsung hero of prosperity, the firm.
Yeah.
Because I love movies. We all love movies, but I've just never seen a movie where Megacorp was the good guy.
Yeah, right.
But in our book, if you actually, think about this, a few hundred companies, 200 or 300, accounts for 2/3 of the world's R&D.
Research and development.
Yeah, research and development.
Yeah.
So the large firm is actually a really important player in this, and it actually makes sense if you think about it. If you go to Indonesia, what you'll be struck by is almost all commerce is executed in micro business, like almost all. And there's no such thing as a rich country that's only made of micro businesses, right? And in a way, if you think about what the process of getting rich is, I remember I talked about capital. The place where that capital is formed, the definition of a large company is a place where lots of people have agreed to agglomerate over a bigger clump of capital. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does.
So that's the final bit, is what allows large firms to form. And, one of the weird things is if you look at an economy as it grows and it becomes more complex, the firms grow even faster than the economy.
Yeah.
And that's, the ultimate sign of the complexity of an economy is what you can do in a modern firm. So I promise I'm not a shill for big corporates, but we do make the observation that if you want to see where does human capital form, where do large capital projects happen, where does R&D happen, and by the way, 70% of trade also within MNCs, multinational corporations.
Yeah.
So you'd ask the question, why did we spend so much time worrying about this machine of progress? Why does that even matter? And the reason is, if you want to ask the question, could we do it again and how we do it again, you kind of got to understand the machine.
It's been done.
And maybe if you understand why there's friction and exhaust and noise today, it's which parts of that machine are kind of sputtering, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to Australia, because you make the point in the book that urbanisation and cities have driven a great deal of progress, and Australia is one of the most urbanised countries in the world, but our productivity is stagnating. So what's gone wrong here?
Well, there's a lot that went right, by the way.
Yeah.
But from from 1820 to 1920, Australia was the China. Like, we were the fastest growing economy in the world.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, and Melbourne had the highest GDP per capita, something like that.
It's why sometimes I walk down the street in Melbourne or even Adelaide, where I know I've been visiting there a bit, or Sydney, and you go, why do we have all these amazing buildings from the 1800s? Like, I thought we were like a convict settlement and a penal colony. And you go, how did all this happen? And the answer was we had the giantest economic boom, and it was partly because Australia is really one of the first places where genuinely, there's lots of pluses and minuses in our history, but one of the pluses, it's one of the first places where genuinely Enlightenment values were allowed to happen, like the first free press and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't all bad. And then
convicts had property rights.
That was the big thing that Macquarie. That was the big thing, right? So it's this belief, funny enough, in the democratisation of capital. Yeah. Which created a freer market in some ways. And so we've kind of kept up since then. The US has gone further, though.
Sure.
There's periods like in the 60s and the 90s where we went faster than the US.
Yeah.
But there's long periods like the 70s and the 80s and recently where we fall behind again. Mm-hmm. And actually in the last 10 years in Australia, we've kind of had almost zero productivity growth.
Yeah.
And all of the economic growth that we've had in Australia is from population, and also people are working harder, by the way. So if we talk about this machine of progress, there's something that's really sputtered out in Australia to make that happen.
Would you argue that energy has something to do with that?
So it comes down to this thing called productivity, which sounds like this kind of very technical. It's actually very simple. It's like per hour of human effort, how much stuff can you contribute to everyone else?
Yeah.
And if you can get more stuff done per hour of human effort.
I can sew more dresses if I have a sewing machine.
That's right.
Than if I did by hand.
And then the time freed up from that, someone can do something else, and you get this explosion of specialisation. And
I like the example you give of pet haircuts.
Exactly. Well, exactly. I mean, and we have whole new jobs we'll come later to the impact of, I presume, of technology and jobs.
Yeah.
But what is the machine that sputtered out? Energy is part of it. If you look at the maths of Australia's situation in particular, zero productivity growth, and actually the worst disposable income growth performance in the OECD. For us as Australians, it's weird because you and I, we grew up with this narrative of specialness of Australia. We've longest time with no recession, the best government finances, and in a way our narrative about Australia is only just kind of catching up to reality now, and the narrative actually is status. And potentially even decline. So if you got to do the why on productivity, two mathematical causes is, first of all, the non-market sector, which is things like public servants and nothing disparaging anyone who works in those sectors, or education or health. They've grown at like more than 2 times the rate for 30 years, right? Just for a really, really, really long time. So in Australia, 30 years ago, 20% of hours happened in the non-market sector, but now it's almost 30%. Yeah. It's like a see from space kind of shift. That's the first reason. But the second reason is we're just not getting investment to come into Australia because the MGI's view is about 80% of productivity is actually just investment. Yeah. Right? Just investment. Capital per worker is what we care about. And Australia just stopped investing. So if you go, why? Why did we stop investing? That's where, and look at the sectors where our productivity growth is the slowest, you get energy and construction. So you can't build things and you can't energise things. But even if you go, why, one layer deeper, I actually think it's something deeper than that, which is the golden goose that laid all the eggs just got forgotten about. And if you go through any legislation that's been passed, I would challenge anyone to show me a bit of legislation that has been passed which was purely about driving economic growth and investment. I don't think you'll find it. I think our to-do list as a country was just full of everything else except that. The deeper cause is actually, what we talk about in our book is we've just given up on the growth train, that if you don't think growth is good, if you don't think growth's for everyone, like it's fine, Elon might be in Mars, but what about the rest of us? Yeah. And if you don't think growth's even possible, then it doesn't get up the political agenda and you kind of get this self-fulfilling prophecy.
It seems to me that people can, or societies can, become a victim of their own success. You know, we see that with vaccines because we've eradicated infectious diseases. We can have these luxury beliefs where I don't need to vaccinate my child against smallpox because it's, you know, a rare disease or it's been eradicated and therefore I won't. And then we get these outbreaks of measles. I should have used the example of measles, not smallpox, but you get the point.
Yeah.
We can, like, progress is, it can blind us to what gave rise to it in the first place.
Well, we've got economic measles.
Right.
It's no, you're 100% right.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate because the McKinsey Global Institute has this kind of global remit. I have this conversation with people all around the world, and we talk about it. But this crisis of hope is not just confined to Australia, though. In Australia, it's I think the number from the Edelman survey is 1 in 5 Australians believes the next generation is going to be better off than the last, which is bizarre when you think about our grandparents' story.
Right.
The US is not dissimilar, but in France it's like 6%.
Yeah.
So this is a society that's kind of given up on growth. Now, why was Australia able to do that? I think luxury is a huge part of it. And, you know, if you're in Canberra and you've got record high commodity prices that stayed stronger much longer than anyone expected them to do, so you've got very healthy tax receipts. You've got a property market that has made everyone feel very rich. Yeah. And by the way, on paper, Australia is one of the richest places in the world, if not the richest, if you measure depending on how you do the currency conversion. But you've got a bit of inflation, which flatters the tax receipts and makes things, and then you've got heaps of population growth, the fastest population growth in the OECD. Actually, our population grows faster than India, faster than Indonesia.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like... And all of those things, if you're Captain SS Australia up on the bridge, you're not feeling the engine down below is starting to blow smoke, but you're not feeling it yet.
But we can see with the population that it's fraying. Social cohesion is fraying. People are becoming upset and angry, and often we don't identify economic causes, although most people do identify cost of living as being their primary concern. But it seems to me that it's very easy for the public, the media, and politicians to find scapegoats rather than truly identify the causes of this malaise. And we can see that overseas with, you know, the resurgence of popularity in socialist ideas, you know, certain minorities are being scapegoated. So things are falling apart a little bit. You know, I thought that your book could have a different title. It reminded me a little bit of Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature, The Decline of Violence. And I thought you guys could have called it The Decline of Poverty.
Well, you're right. I mean, poverty's gone down from 60% of all humans to 10%, but it's really the rise of affluence.
Yeah.
If you think about Hans Rosling, right? Yeah. By the way, Steven Pinker was one of our heroes in writing this book. But Hans Rosling, who did this amazing book called Factfulness about how, and like just bringing everyone's attention to actually the world is better than you think.
Yeah.
He has these kind of 4 levels of economic existence, and the best level 4, is $32 a day. And since 1925, the number of human beings who can thrive on $32 a day or more is grown 66 times. So the carrying capacity of the world, like the world economy today is 24 times bigger than it was in 1925. And the reason I say that when it comes to population is these kind of discussions are all outcomes of zero-sum thinking.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not talking about one, we'll come back to population and demographics in Australia later, but globally, there's a temptation to think there's a lot of people who've got enough. Actually, we're in the middle of a massive demographic crisis. Half of the world is already have declining working age population. We can get in these kind of conversations around there's not enough stuff, someone's taking away my things, etc. They're really manifestations of zero-sum thinking. Right. Now, I actually think economics is upstream of everything, and I think if you have zero-sum thinking at the moment, I kind of don't blame you because that's what the economy's delivering.
Right. Yeah.
That's what the economy's delivering for you. Like if you're a 30-year-old in our country or in Europe today, in your adult life, you've actually never seen economic growth.
Yeah.
And you've only ever seen taxes go up.
Yeah.
So we need to earn the optimism of people, because the real intergenerational inequality is actually inequality to growth. I've experienced so much more growth in my lifetime on average than a 30-year-old has.
Sure.
So the reason I say that is it kind of frames this debate and populism, which is just socialism and right-wing populism are just both manifestations of zero-sum thinking, of competitive thinking. And actually, ironically, while we are justifiably, I think, worried about the population growth in Australia, right, at a global level, the biggest problem is lack of population growth.
Yeah, right. On the lack of growth for the younger generations, it reminds me of the book by Robert Gordon, The Rise and Fall of American Growth. Now, his book overlaps with yours quite a lot in that it identifies this miraculous century where we had all of these inventions, household appliances, sanitation, medical progress and so on, but he is much more pessimistic about the future, and he identifies headwinds, so the demographic headwind, aging population, and then there are a few others. So how do two analysts or different schools of analysts look at the same data but come to wildly different conclusions about the future?
Yeah, I mean, the world is the way it is and has improved the way it is thanks to the magic of 1% and 2%, right? So it's small amounts of improvement growing. So, for example, we find a bit more copper every year, so we're doubling copper reserves every 21 years, or we get better and better at farming, so output per hectare just goes up 1.5%, 2% a year just every year. We get way better at energy, so we use less energy per dollar of GDP at the rate of about 1.5% a year. And not only that, we get way better at doing it cleanly, so emissions go down per dollar 2.5% a year. So it's this kind of 1% and 2%. So in our book, this idea, and we haven't talked about the main thesis of our book yet, which is universal prosperity is totally possible. I hope we come to that.
Yeah.
It's really a question of, do you believe in that 1% and 2% keeping on going?
Right.
And it's actually a reasonable question because it's never happened in human history except really in the last 100 years.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, the global economy per head, the GDP per head doubled in the 1800s, but it went 6x in the last century. We've never seen that before. So when we say, can we do it again, it's actually not an unreasonable question. But you've got to go down to, well, kind of what actually makes that possible? What's the bill of materials to do that? So you need to have enough materials to make it happen. You need enough energy. You need enough clean air. You need to be able to feed everybody, right? But you need enough ideas, and we'll come to that. So because what they're really saying is the era of big ideas is done, because what makes that 1% and 2% work is accumulation of knowledge. Like the amazing thing about our society and, increasingly urbanised, increasingly educated, is it's just not forgetful.
Yeah.
And because it's not forgetful and it can do a lot of experiments, we have so much asymmetry, so asymmetric exposure to good stuff.
So knowledge is compounding.
Compounding knowledge, exactly. Now, but that said, the whole middle section of our book is kind of growth on trial. Both is growth good and is growth, is it something we should aspire for? And there are a bunch of reasons why you should feel nervous at the moment.
Yeah.
Right? Because we've come out of this era, since the Berlin Wall fell down, the world has been a very stable place. Like it's changed a lot, but it's changed on train tracks that have been the same. So it's had a very unipolar setting. It's had Moore's law, which is just basically the main driver of technological progress. And Moore's law is every 18 to 24 months you double the number of transistors on a chip. It sounds boring and nerdy, but that being true for 60 years is what kind of made
NVIDIA.
All this happen.
Yeah.
It's been a world in which actually demographics got better every year for the world. So under the Christmas tree every year you got more taxpayers. Right? It was a good demographics. Where energy, there was plenty and you could all put it on a ship. So not only was there lots of it, but you could put it everywhere. And finally, you had the biggest simultaneous supply and demand shocks in human history from India and China entering. Yeah. So you had easy growth and cheap money. So we had that era, but all of a sudden, right, we're in this kind of funny phase change where we're in a new era, and those 5 realities are all flipping.
Yeah.
And this creates a lot of confusion, but I would just argue different is not bad. So we've got unipolar to multipolar. We've got digitisation to humanisation. We'll talk about AI later, which is actually about 3 times faster than Moore's law. So it's a whole new curve. We've got demographic gift to demographic burden. That's a serious issue. In Australia, this year is the year we crossed more 65 plus than under 16. So, and we've got energy going from something that was just, you didn't think about it. So, a country like Australia, we're the biggest diesel importer in the world. You could do that, but in a world where actually maybe energy is contentious, but also we've got this whole electrification thing. And then finally, easy growth and cheap money, we're all scratching our heads and going, well, why? Where's the easy growth and cheap money? And forgetting that for the last 40 years or so, like more than 1 in 4 humans lived in economies that were growing hypergrowth. Yeah. More than 5%. Yeah. And now less than 3% of humans live in hypergrowth economies. So we're in a completely different macro environment. So that feels confusing. By the way, I don't think it's at all uncertain. I think those things are all known. But they all bring challenges. Our understanding of progress is that it's pretty anti-fragile, to use a sense that everything you threw at progress seemed to have made it stronger. Take, for example, unipolar to multipolar. Everyone goes, oh, it's scary and it's bad. But I'd say, no. The Apollo program needed Sputnik. I think geostrategic competition is going to be good for the world. So the only one thing, by the way, we found that really could put sand in the gears and stop the engine was collectivism.
Oh, okay.
It's the only thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Manifested politically.
Well, Venezuela in 1950 was twice the income of Spain, and now it's 1/8. Might be 1/7, but it's around that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is gaining traction around the world.
Zero-sum thinking. It's the enemy of all.
Yeah.
It's the political undermining. It's the underlying mindset. And the irony is, if you do a history of the world, what you see is the world is totally positive sum.
Yeah.
But what makes the world, where we fail, is where our politics are zero sum.
Yeah. I just read an article for Quillette after seeing the Odyssey film, and it got me thinking about technological progress and art. And so it was the invention of the little metal tube that contained paint that allowed painters to go outside of the studio and paint landscapes, which is how we got Impressionism. And it was through innovation in industrial chemistry, which created new colours that allowed Van Gogh to do his sunflowers and his miraculous art that had never been seen before because the colours were new. And so it's not an original insight, but the idea that art is downstream from technology made me feel optimistic.
But it's funny you mention that because I had a spare day in New York. I was like stuck for a weekend and on a business trip, and I went to the Met. And when you go to see those wonderful paintings, but there's a huge number of paintings of idyllic peasant farming things from that era. So the ironic thing is when they had that great technology, that new paint, what they actually rushed to do was protest against the Industrial Revolution by painting an idealised picture of what peasant life looked like. So many of the paintings, beautiful paintings, by the way, are kind of romanticized visions of village life. Yeah. And the visions of firms and corporations and machines are all ghastly and scary.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we have to override our sort of psychology. We've always been afraid of machines. We anthropomorphize machines. That goes back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We're afraid. And we have to sort of overcome those natural biases when we're afraid of progress. We're afraid of the unknown. But the point you make about firms being so central to progress. I've not heard that point being made before. So you identified something like 100 firms out of 8,000 in the world who are driving all of the progress, all of the productivity, rather.
That's right. So the roots of the McKinsey Global Institute, which has been going, nearly 40 years, was studying productivity and why was it different. And we would say, well, why can McKinsey do that? We're not academics, is because we had the experience working actually in the industries and kind of bringing those insights. So we've always been fascinated with this basic question of where productivity actually comes from. And the theory is it comes from technology and then this magic word called diffusion. It just kind of magically goes through an economy. But they forget the actual way diffusion happens is through companies doing radical things. So when we looked at productivity growth and broke it down at the firm contribution level, what we found is we did it in UK, Germany, the US, for a whole bunch of sectors. What you found is the first 5%, the really amazing firms that did breakthrough, we call them standouts, they generated 80% of productivity. And now productivity sounds dry, but if you follow the logic that our life, no one gets out of bed thinking about GDP, but you think about, we have a good education, will a pothole get fixed? But that's all GDP, and that's living standards, and the only known way to improve living standards is productivity.
Yeah.
So it turns out that if you actually care about people and living standards and you want to know what the source of that is, it's actually a few excellent companies at any point. Now, those companies change over time, but companies like in the US, Amazon, Apple, but even things like Delta Airlines, or in Germany, the retailer Rewe, these companies doing big moves to improve their productivity, that's what actually shifts the dial for people's lives. But I know it sounds strange.
Yeah, but the mechanism is that they're investing their profits back into the company, into research and development, and through this research and development, they're inventing new things, right?
The mechanism is that they have such a good business model and they put so much growth and capital into it that the workers generate more per hour.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And that's enough to lift the whole boat. Now, I'm certainly don't belittle the role of SMEs. I would acknowledge, though, that one reason America's richer than Australia is they have less SMEs. They have more large. If you get a house built in America, the firm building that house is a much bigger firm than what would be building your house in Australia. Yeah. But you're almost just by versus an SME versus a large company, the productivity is almost double. By the way, there's no magic to it. It's just very, very simple. More equipment. Once you...
And more institutional knowledge, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't mean to romanticize megacorp, but it's like an emblem of human cooperation, everyone working together in a system.
What about the role of human capital? Okay, so what if the best firms can attract the best people? And what if it's the people who are driving this as opposed to the firms themselves?
Well, I think that's exactly the point. In fact, when you look at human capital and where the human capital gets grown in society, it's actually in large companies as well.
Yeah.
And we can measure that by looking at what happens to people's careers as they move in and out of large companies, and you can see that's where the human capital is. Now, if I tried to disentangle JP Morgan or Commonwealth Bank or BHP or NVIDIA down to which of it is the patent, which of it's that particular bit of equipment or know-how, the leader, the people, that's virtually impossible. All we can say is that kind of strange bundle does something pretty magical.
Yeah.
And there's no other bundle that we know of that can do it. And while sometimes in the era of these giant firms that feels scary, the one satisfaction we can have is that these big giants are constantly vulnerable. Yeah. So now can you imagine 10 years ago people even imagining that Google might be nervous? Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
But today...
Yeah. So going back to human capital, I've been thinking about it a little bit since the government's last budget and the changes to capital gains tax and how that's going to impact startup founders here in Australia. And it seems to me that the last thing you want to do as a country is drive away your most talented people who are going to start creating new businesses. It's something that I didn't see that in your book, the analysis of exceptionally talented individuals like the Albert Einsteins of the world. You say that it's a small number of firms that are driving progress, but even within those firms, I imagine there's a small cluster of hyper-productive individuals who are innovating and inventing new things. Can we recognise these talented individuals a little bit more, do you think?
Well, I think we come from a view of a fundamental mindset that it's something we talk about in the book, everything that you want more of is positively associated with growth, and everything you want less of is negatively. So if you can boil anything down to like growth is good, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have a mentality that that the best thing for society, or as I say, the biggest intergenerational inequality is inequality of growth access, like that's the thing you really need to fix, then you've got to ask the question, okay, what promotes growth? And what promotes growth is dynamism, entrepreneurship, capital formation, and large standout companies. Now, what's different? Let me use this example this way. When we look at those large companies, we can straight away explain why the US, by the way, steaming ahead, its productivity growth is like in the mid-twos, which we haven't had in Australia since the 90s, and nor has Europe. Europe's, I think Australia's kind of closer to in the market sector, like 0.5%, and it's much lower.
Yeah.
We're really being outrun. So why is it, if my contention is a lot of the productivity growth comes from large firms, not denigrating small firms. They are, by the way, small firms become large firms, and they also employ people, and but it actually comes down to the behaviour of these large firms. And in Germany, they're too sticky.
Okay.
So what you see in the US is a lot of the fact that these large firms improve their productivity is because they pull more labour in.
Yeah.
And the worst and the big firms that aren't doing well let more labour out. Whereas in Germany, the key to economic growth is not large firms that are kind of held in stasis.
Yeah.
It's the opportunity to get in that kind of tumble dryer and let large firms emerge naturally. So if you think that growth is good, then you are pro-entrepreneurship. If you believe in a zero-sum game and there's no growth, then an entrepreneur to you is actually someone who's jeopardising your social contract.
Right.
And to me, that's the thing we've got to fix, because the entrepreneur is the hero of the story, not the villain.
Absolutely. The employment thing is a big one. I think we recently published an article at Quillette by the former chair of the Human Rights Tribunal in Canada. He said that he came to feel that the tribunal was turning into an extortion ring. So an example he gave was an employee who caused a workplace accident, was on crystal meth in the workplace. But being a drug addict is a protected identity because it's a disability. And so this employer volunteered to pay for rehab. This employee ended up quitting anyway, but then attempted to sue the employer. And the employer ended up agreeing to a payout because it would have been cheaper than progressing legally. So it seems to me that it's like the luxury issue. We are building regulations and laws that hamper firms and just throw sand in the gears of this progress machine. And that's like an absurd example.
It's a crazy example. But I wouldn't use the word human rights. I'm not really qualified to talk like that. But what I'd say, the right that I want people to care more about is the right to growth and hope and optimism for a young person. And while you think you might be preserving someone's right, if you're creating lock-in and stasis, then we're really taking rights away from someone else.
Yeah. But I guess the point is that these concepts are quite abstract. So how do we convey them to people who don't perhaps have an economics degree? How do we explain the benefits of growth when it's not immediately apparent because people aren't feeling it in their lives?
Well, here's my hack.
Okay.
It's putting possibility in the room.
Okay.
So imagine this. Like, remember I used the thought experiment of we thought about our grandparents.
Yeah.
My eldest daughter doesn't have any children yet, so but I'm not a grandfather yet, but hopefully will be one day. And in 2100, when my grandchild's looking back, will they see the plateau of humanity or will they see what we did? And so we tried to put a measure on that of like, well, what's a aspiration for humanity that's very tangible? And we thought, well, let's make it rich so everyone earns more than 80,000. It's got lots of natural beauty. We love the environment. It's astoundingly beautiful, but it's got an incredible urban scene with great technology and great culture. It's got high civic engagement, and it's safe if your daughter's late home from a party, you sleep sound, you know everyone's going to help her get home. And the trains run on time. And then there's my trip. I've just described Switzerland, right?
Yeah.
And Switzerland I like because it's real. Mm-hmm. I've been there. I can. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn beautiful. It's pretty rich. It's and it's available with current amount of human culture, ingenuity, whatever we have. I don't need science fiction. I don't need Mars. The issue is Switzerland is 9 million people. In other words, 1 in 1,000 humans. So my possibility thinking is it's possible for 1 in 999. Well, sorry, 1 in 1,000. But what about the other 999? So the other end of the barbell is Burundi, also 9 million people, but 1/100th the income. Burundi's a country in a landlocked country in Africa. And so the thought experiment we put in here is in 2100, would it be conceivable that the poorest country in the world can look like Switzerland? So Burundi, 100x. So it would have to grow at 6.1% a year, GDP per capita. By the way, the Asian tigers all did that. China did that. Chile did it for a while. So we know that's possible. It would have to sustain that for a long time. And if the major economies like us kind of do our 1.5%, that world would be a really good world. It would be a world of universal prosperity. But the GDP would have to be 8.5 times bigger.
Right.
And so as soon as I say that, people go, what are you? And I remind them that we're 24 times bigger than we were in 1925. But it's amazing when you put possibility in the room, when you go, actually, here's what would be good for humanity, every person living a really empowered life, a safe life with a lot of freedom. But we'd have to have 8.5 times bigger economy to do it. Everyone accepts, yes, you can't get that without the bigger economy. So then we have a different conversation of, well, is that even a thing? Like, do we have enough copper or steel or energy? And we did all the maths. That's what most of our book's about, is when you do the maths, you go, actually, plenty stuff.
Right.
So even climate is a complex thing to discuss, but that's solvable too. But what I found is when I put possibility in the room and say, because I'm not now talking about today and everyone fighting, I'm saying, let's imagine this. What kind of world would get us there? And then today's zero-sum thinking just seems a bit silly. And then you think, well, what do I need to get there? I need the 1s and 2%, but I just need to believe I can keep getting them.
Seems to me that some of the biggest barriers, if not the biggest barrier, is our institutions. There was a part in your book about inclusive versus extractive institutions. Have you done research on how a society shifts from having extractive institutions to more well-functioning ones?
Yeah, see, I don't know what comes first, and we're not experts like on kind of institutional economics, and like MGI, we try to play a more humble role of like micro to macro and just analyse industries.
Yeah.
And that's our happy place.
Yeah.
But we acknowledge you need industries, but I'm just not convinced what comes first. I know that's fashionable and there's Nobel Prizes going for Acemoglu and all these things on the topic of institutions. No doubt great economies have good institutions.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think what's underplayed is the institution that matters most is the thriving large firm. But to have a thriving large firm, you have to have so much trust. Think about capital markets. Like, capital markets sound abstract and scary and selfish and greedy, but it's really just people trusting each other and trusting the future. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And the interest rate is just a reflection of how much, fundamentally, how much people are willing to trade off the past and the future. So the ultimate thing is around trust. And we had really epic amounts of growth in the 50s and 60s when, on average, the OECD countries spent like 8% on social spending, and now it's like 25%. So this idea that quality institutions only means bigger institutions, I'm not sure. So what are the real institutions we're talking about? I think are institutions of mutual trust. Now, by the way, free media, rule of law, independent judiciaries, parliaments, I think the real institutions are one level lower. It's not a building with a name on it. And you'd argue, if you look at recent times, the buildings we have with the names on them have maybe detached themselves from the project of progress.
And obviously trust is a cultural phenomenon, not just institutional. You know, it comes from day-to-day interactions you have on the street. picking up your kids from school and interacting with strangers and living in a peaceful, harmonious society. I want to end on your whole book is full of optimism, but I want to end on an optimistic note. And you describe Switzerland in the future, 100, all countries can be at the standard of living of Switzerland. But what might a country like Australia look like 100 years from now if we take the most optimistic views on things like artificial intelligence?
Yes.
What might we look like?
Yeah, so we're going to have challenges. We're going to have ups and downs. It's not going to be a straight line. We're going to have to learn to navigate all sorts of things like demographics and the social contract. We're going to have to learn how to redesign our whole tax system around different stages of work. So we'll start with income. If you follow the maths, the income in Australia would be around $250,000 a year for each person in today's dollars.
Yeah.
So we'd have, total abundance.
Yeah.
And don't believe what anyone tells you. All research says more income brings more happiness.
Yeah. Right.
We'd have an economy that was very energetic, like full of energy. In fact, to make our century of plenty possible, the world needs, it doesn't need 8.5 times more energy. Remember, it has to be 8.5 times bigger, but it does need 3 to 4 times more energy. So when anyone talks to you about an energy transition, we're well past that. We're an energy addition. We've created a whole energy system. In our book, that's kind of 50% nuclear and 50% kind of everything else. By the way, spoiler alert, we're still using fossil fuels because we need the molecules.
Okay.
The things that fossil fuels makes are great molecules. Population-wise, I don't know because the global population's not going to be that much bigger. But we'll have a lot of energy. Now, the world of work will be really, really different because one thing we talk about with AI a lot is the doomer narrative. By the way, even our own employment office of the government just came out saying there's no discernible effect. In fact, there's more coders now.
Okay.
I think the number that struck me is that 14 times more code got written to GitHub this year than the year before. So, we'll have this, explosion of creation. Yeah. And AI will help us solve our twin problems of demographics and productivity. So we'll look back and in the same way, the Cultural Revolution in China was keep everyone on the farm. We'd look back at that and say, well, keep everyone as an accountant, and it wouldn't make sense. You know what I mean? It just wouldn't make sense to us. Yeah. The other point is we would be in a different world though, and maybe this is what scares people because the world would be much more equal. I mentioned that Switzerland is 100 times richer than Burundi, but by the end of this, because according to catch-up growth, and if they just use the tools, all Burundi has to get to is Switzerland, so they have to get to today. Does that make any sense? Yeah. But in that world, Burundi's only 3 times poorer, not 100 times poorer. So it's a world that has a different sense of, and where kind of everyone's at the table. So that will feel really different. It's material intense. We still need the stuff in the ground. The idea that the mining industry is passé, do not believe that for 1 second, because take copper, our century of plenty, we need 5 times more copper in the next 75 years than we pulled out in the last 75. And by the way, we've checked. Yeah. It's all there. Okay. We've checked. So that's what Australia will look like. My hope is that when we put possibility in the room, and when we talk about actually the limits to growth aren't physics or chemistry, but it's actually our human thinking and our human culture, maybe that will create different conversations. Now, I'm aware, though, that as we talked about before, that if you're a 30-year-old, your economic experience is a bit diminished and your economic outlook, you might be worried because you're carrying you see government debt and ageing and, my tax is going to be high, you see lower growth. Your kind of forecast looks a bit... Yeah. We need to earn optimism. Okay. And because the nation wasn't built by pessimists. Yeah. So I don't know if this book, I didn't try and predict we were going to have that world. I just wanted to show one really, really humble thing, which it's possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for writing the book and thanks for explaining this. I'm actually inspired by the vision of Australia in 100 years from now. But it also shows us how we need to make the right decisions today to enable that to happen. So we've got to step out of this zero-sum thinking. So thanks for chatting with me today. And where can we buy your book?
You can get it on any digital channel. It's easy to get. Yeah.
It's on Amazon?
Yeah, it's on Amazon.
One of those firms.
Yeah, they actually were this time, but maybe next time they won't be.
Okay. All right. Thanks,
All right,
Chris.
thanks, Claire.